Welcome to another groundbreaking episode of Let's Talk AI, Trust, Innovation, People, powered as always by EY.ai, right here on businesstech.co.za. I'm your host, Michael Avery, and today we're prompting deeper into the dynamic world of generative AI, and it really is on everyone's lips at the moment. I've never seen a technology that has been so transformative in such a short space of time. It really is quite revolutionary. And we're joined by Kavi Pather, EY Africa AY and Advanced Analytics Leader. And as always, great to chat, Kavi. How are you doing?
Absolutely. Doing great, Michael, and great to be with you here again, talking about AI.
Fantastic. I mean, I think it was probably a year ago, or roughly 12 months, 11 months that we spoke. And we spoke about innovating with AI. But this time, I think we should address the kind of shiny new objects challenge. And it always happens with technology. What do you see as the key challenge that organizations are facing in unlocking the potential of AI?
Yeah, so there's a lot right now constraining AI in the short term. The amount of processing power and compute available, the level of education in organizations, and an understanding of its applications, and the lack of talented individuals, just to name a few. But for me, all of these will be solved over time, which is why I think the key constraint is really going to be trust in the technology. And we see this, with a recent survey of CEOs, which we ran globally. 1,200 CEOs from around the world responded, and 65% were really excited about AI for its productivity and efficiency potential. But equal numbers were really concerned about the ethical implications and the risks of the technology. And I think this is very telling. I think trust in the technology will unlock the potential of AI, but without it, people will actually not allow it in as many spaces as it could be used. For example, will we allow ChatGPT to provide financial advice if it continues to just make things up? I think the regulators will outlaw it, and rightly so. But if it can be shown to be safe, then we unlock a world of quality financial advice for even the poorest people among us. And I think that's really the potential and the conundrum.
Yeah, and to your point, hallucinating is probably one of the big issues that caused the initial mistrust, because when the technology, certainly in its current guise, and the way a ChatGPT redefined the user experience by these large language models, it enabled so many more people to start using it. But then occasionally, if you do see it hallucinate, that does erode a lot of trust. Another big issue that I've encountered is also potentially privacy, IP issues. What happens to my data that I upload into the model? What are people concerned about when you chat to them?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really the kinds of things we hear about. I mean, I think the privacy issues, as you mentioned, are top of people's minds. The question that always comes up is around bias. Models can inadvertently adopt societal and cultural bias based on their training data. We've spoken about the hallucinations and the misinformation. Really, the job displacement issue always comes up again and again as well. Automation of jobs leading to job losses, especially in a country like South Africa, where we face high unemployment already. And then security. I mean, these models and these systems can also be vulnerable to hacking and what are known as adversarial attacks, just like any other technology. However, I think there's a deeper issue as well, which people feel but maybe don't speak about as much. People's concerns with AI are really rooted in my view, around what I call the current paradox, which is where we have AI tools that are both incredibly smart, but also very, very easily fooled. So the example I always like to use is, for example, AlphaGo, which is one of the foremost AI technologies that can play the game of Go and beat the world's best humans, really, really easily. I think the AlphaGo score in terms of rankings is like 5,000, whereas the highest human is rated 2,500. So it's almost that much better than the world's best players, then the world's best players are better than say I would be.
Yeah.
But what's really interesting is it can really easily be fooled by a very simple strategy that was devised by researchers. And we see this again and again. Image classifiers outperform humans in recognizing images and faces, but can easily be misled just with a few alterations to an image. And so this vulnerability in the technology, or this paradox, I think is also something that at an underlying level almost erodes the trust in the technology.
Yeah, that AlphaGo example is a good one. I've seen I think it's a Netflix docu with Lee
Yeah.
Sedol, and at the end where he succumbs to this AI technology, there was almost a disbelief in the room.
Yeah.
Here's the human champion who could never be beaten by a machine, and this realization that we've entered a new paradigm. But given that you can fool these machines, that there are strategies, what's the solution? How do we go about this? Because the positive aspects of this technology, to your earlier point, if we can democratize access to financial education, if we can democratize access to radiography analysis for the poorest of the poor, where you don't have that kind of depth of medicinal talent in a community. All of these things are hugely important for society. So what do you see as the solution to overcome some of these challenges?
Yeah, I think firstly to recognize, this is a feature of a young technology and things will get better over time. But I think secondly, it's also important to realize that we can't make people trust the systems. All we can really do is build systems that are worthy of trust. And we can make systems worthy of trust by actively designing for trust and managing the risks from the beginning. So we can identify all the risks that a certain system is susceptible to, and then manage those with things like regular testing, independent verifications, and dare I say it, audits. Engaging with users and getting some of their feedback. I think things like ethical guidelines and training the developers of the systems are also really, really important. And then, of course, just continuously monitoring the software and the systems to make sure that they're performing as they should be. All of these are valid strategies. And then the number one thing I recommend right now is to always have a human in the loop. I don't think the technology is mature enough yet to completely be left to its own devices. But I think ultimately we're trying to build a feeling of trust, and that starts with how people experience the applications out there, and we should always bear that in mind.
And I think that's a very important point, that one needs to be acutely aware that you can't impose trust on people, and you've got to take a design thinking almost approach to this to say, well, how do you naturally embed that trust into the system? I mean, we can do it. Who would have thought, sort of 15 years ago, that we would trust someone we hail on our phones to just get in their car and take us from A to B, or trust that we could just go and stay in someone's room in their home. But we've seen Uber and Airbnb have built an entire economy around trust. But when it comes to the risks, I mean, identifying and managing the risks associated with AI, I mean, are these just the ones that we've just discussed, bias, misinformation? And how do you approach something that sounds probably easier said than done?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, firstly, the risks are different for different systems. For example, if you're writing a medical report versus having AI write a rap song, obviously, the need for accuracy is completely different in those scenarios. Another example would be, people often talk about explainability. If you are pricing an insurance contract and you need to explain to a customer why their premium has increased, explainability is really important. Whereas for facial recognition applications, as an example, I just need to know whether the face that I'm looking at matches the one I'm searching for or not. So I don't really need to explain it as much. And so I think, firstly, we need to recognize that identifying the risks means that the risks are not the same for different applications. Also, what I find people getting confused with in many organizations is the level of risk. I think, at the application level, we've spoken about some of these risks. But when we talk about the enterprise and managing AI across the enterprise, it's a different ball game. I think the key risk actually at the enterprise level is identifying all the instances of AI that you're exposed to across your organization, because
Yeah.
today they can be built in almost everywhere, right? You can call a simple API in any piece of software and implement ChatGPT or another kind of model. Another problem I see is actually defining what we mean by AI. Is a simple statistical model built in a spreadsheet an instance of AI, or do we have to go all the way to the most sophisticated, ChatGPT? So these are the kinds of different risks that exist at different levels. And then finally, I would say, we need to be cognizant of things that are in the media, which are actually not risks that we need to worry about right now. Again, I see people worrying about things like machines becoming conscious, believe it or not, rogue AI systems, or even mass manipulation. I think these are obviously societal risks that the technology can bring about, but right now I don't see them as major concerns for organizations.
I do think potentially at a society-wide level, it's instructive, and I think we'll come to it to look at what the Screenwriters Guild of America achieved with its groundbreaking agreement with employers around how to kind of govern the use of AI and to put some guardrails in place between the employers and the employees who were clearly worried that AI is going to come and with inputting their past writing, be able to produce new and novel screenplays that could then be used by their employers. But surely it's not just about the governance process. It really is also about the people and the culture here, as the Screenwriters Guild example demonstrates.
Absolutely. I think people are critical, and culture absolutely so. Especially given the rise of co-pilots and chatbots like ChatGPT. We're talking about a technology that's going to not just automate processes, but actually augment human knowledge and augment human ability. So the people are really at the center of this revolution that we're facing. And I think we're also aiming for not just adoption of the technology, but responsible adoption. I always like to point out, we have the simultaneous problems right now of getting of some people in organizations resisting change, like people always do. So getting people to actually adopt and use the technology, making them more efficient. But then at the same time, we have there's always those few who are really gung ho and really dive in head first, but who can sometimes be reckless. And we almost have to manage both of those groups of people within an organization. What I've seen work well in terms of adoption and responsible adoption is both a tone from the top. So we need a senior sponsor that is really going to set the tone and encourage people to start using the technology, using the co-pilots, but also then the role of young people and the people lower down in the organization. There was a really great example in one of our teams where one of our young people built an application that reduced a data processing task from 3 weeks to a day. And I think what was powerful about it was of course he'd saved a lot of time, but all of a sudden he'd inspired everyone around him,
Yeah.
including the more senior people in the team. And I think that those kinds of things are critical for the culture change. And then, of course, education is key. We talk about data literacy. I think we need to start talking about AI literacy, and the training that goes, around that, basic understanding and familiarity with the technology, but also then educating people about the risks and how to responsibly use it. And then, of course, the business applications, because that's what's going to really unlock the value.
Yeah, and talking to your CEO a couple of weeks ago, yeah, EY is walking the talk there around data literacy through the organization. Everyone going through a course to become more familiar and proficient with artificial intelligence and AI. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us, if we want to remain relevant in this new modern world and workplace, that we almost take it on our own responsibility to go out and learn and upskill and just understand the fundamental building blocks of how this technology works. Again, I think that'll also help support trust, because I think once you understand the technology, to your earlier point about consciousness and Skynets and existential threats, you realize that actually this technology hasn't reached that point yet, because you understand what's underneath the hood. Are there risks, though, that we can't manage for? Are there risks out there that you're worried about that we're not looking at?
Well, I think the way I think about it is we'll figure out how to make systems really trustworthy. I think the technical know-how is developing really quickly. And over time, we will be able to get systems to do exactly what we want them to do. So the elimination of bias, for example. But I think that what's really a lot harder is intent. There'll always be bad actors in the world with bad intentions, and so that's a risk that we need to really be on the lookout for. I think using these technologies to aid hacking attacks. A friend of mine actually told me of a case where someone had hacked their Instagram and then created a deep fake video of the person being hacked selling a financial product or some sort of scheme. And so that's really something that I hadn't heard of before, and is a almost opens up a new world in terms of risks to personal privacy and the like.
Yeah.
I think more subtly as well, there are these unintended consequences which we always have to be on the lookout for. So those are some of the risks I think we perhaps are struggling to manage right now, or perhaps not thinking deeply about at the moment. But I think also, regulation is soon on its way. I think that's certainly at the top of a lot of government's agenda, and I think that will help to address some of these risks, certainly in terms of the criminal cases which I mentioned.
Yeah, I recall a case where I think it was Tom Hanks or one of the other Hollywood A-lister celebrities was warning about a deep fake video selling Bitcoin or promoting cryptocurrencies or something. But it is frightening, because the technology is so persuasive, is so convincing, that it's sometimes very difficult to discern the reality from the hyper reality. I guess this is where we need ethical use of AI. How should we be thinking about the ethical use of artificial intelligence?
Absolutely. So I think the way I think about it is the systems are becoming more and more powerful, and with more power really comes more responsibility. So the need for ethics starts to increase, both at a personal level and at an organizational level. I think there's a lot of guidance around, and I think from what I've read, most publications seem to align and provide a good set of principles, the kinds of things you would expect around fairness, transparency, bias, and the like. So I think that considering those kinds of guidelines is a really great place to start. But I think that we also have to go a step deeper. Ethics is somewhat harder than it sounds, and I'll use a technical example. Mathematically, actually, there's no one definition of fairness, for example, and we have to almost choose how we want to define fairness. If we're dealing with two populations who have different risk characteristics, the level at which we accept, say, for example, a loan application, but also the level at which we uh, erroneously reject some applications or erroneously accept some applications, those type 1 and type 2 errors. Those are all those cannot be the same if the underlying risks in the groups are different. And I think that's a difficult conundrum to overcome. And it points to the need to really define what we need by fairness and then actually implement that definition at a technical level. And I think this is a challenge that still lies ahead of almost every organization. I haven't seen the world really grapple with these kinds of issues, at a technical level. So I think there's an easy place to start, but I think the journey is quite hard when it comes to the ethical
Yeah,
consideration.
which raises a whole bunch of concerns around, what regulation might look like. And you mentioned regulation earlier, but I think it does make regulating, across different markets, different jurisdictions, potentially with different relative uh, moral worldviews. Yeah, and I think differences between China and the US, for example, makes it very difficult to have a standard global set of regulations. But when it comes to regulation, what are you tracking on that front, and when are we likely to see it, and what ultimately will good regulation require when it comes to AI?
Yeah, look, I think there's a lot of activity. We saw Sam Altman and the other heads of the AI companies in the U.S. Congress recently actually calling for regulation. Obviously, the EU AI Act, is hot off the press and is currently being implemented. And around the world, a similar level of activity, even in places like China. I think that, taking a step back, firstly, we do have to recognize that long term, some of those societal risks uh, are real. And AI is a systemic risk to society. So it does require a global, concerted response. Otherwise, there will be places in the world where people will be able to build things that perhaps are very, very dangerous. So I think there will be a global response, almost like we saw with what happened with nuclear weapons. Um, I think that in terms of what the regulation will look like, um, what's been drafted in terms of the EU AI Act is a really good start. I think it's quite practical. Classifying uses of AI into high, medium, and low risk, and providing a proportionate response depending on the use case. But I also think that we have to recognize that the technology is moving extremely quickly and evolving extremely quickly. And so the regulations are going to actually need to evolve along with it. And so I think that long term, the kinds of regulations we are going to need are going to look actually very different from the kinds of regulations that we have today.
Well, it sounds, given all of this, like a whole lot to do for any organization. Then the added uncertainty around regulation. Are you sure that this is the best option? Or should companies not just wait and say, we're not going to deploy yet, we're going to wait and see what happens? What's the benefit?
Well, I think the prize here is huge. It's not just the productivity and efficiency gains that those CEOs in our survey were recognizing. I think it's much more than that. Organizations today are thinking about use cases, where it can be used. Um, and I think that's a great place to start, but we need to think much bigger quite quickly. Out of the box is the order of the day. And I think many organizations need to be thinking about how they might reinvent themselves or even parts of their business, because I think that's really the prize when it comes to AI. I use the example of education. In the past, we have 30 students and one teacher. It means that the amount of feedback that one teacher can provide, each student is constrained by their own productivity. Now with AI, the amount of feedback you can give a student is almost unlimited, and it can be individualized. You can take that same concept into the organization or into the corporate, and for example, in the call center or in the contact center, now you can train every individual agent, in a personalized way based on their historical interactions with customers. And so I think that reinvention, or new business models and new products and services is really the prize. And I think that's really why everyone needs to be looking at this very seriously. And to me, the biggest risk right now is actually doing nothing.
Yeah, it speaks to a conversation I was having with Michael Jordan at the launch of his new AI private equity fund. And, they're not going after the guys building the next chat GPT and the tools. He wants to invest in the businesses that are using the tools to transform themselves and to do things differently and to find new revenue streams and completely upend potential markets in which they operate. So that's where a lot of the smart money sees the opportunity. To your point, it's very difficult to gaze into crystal balls in an environment where the technology is evolving so rapidly. But as you sit here today, what is the future likely to hold?
I think for me, and this has perhaps been the theme of our conversation, AI has been overestimated in the short term. I think there is a lot of overhype, but I think it's severely underestimated in the long term. I think in the short term, we'll discover many, many potential applications across every industry. I mean, we already have, and I think there'll be a lot more. Some of them will be quite surprising. I think talents and processing power will remain limiting factors in the short term, but will ultimately be figured out in the long term. We'll figure out ways of training more people and quicker ways of manufacturing those chips that are needed. The speed, the depth, and the breadth of adoption, I think, will very much depend on whether we can build this trust in the technology that I've been speaking about. And I think that's really an open question. I think the more trust there is, the faster things will move and the faster the technology will be adopted. And I think actually in this case, regulation will indeed help rather than hinder. I think in the long term, that's where I believe it is currently underestimated. This to me is one of the most transformative technologies that the world will invent. Economists actually speak about a different kind of GPT. To them, GPT means general purpose technology, and they put the steam engine and electricity itself, in that category. And these are technologies that have really transformed the world and productivity, and really the structure of the global economy. And already I see some economists at Stanford, for example, putting AI not just in that category, but in their view, it's actually going to be top of the list. And to quote Sam Altman, who I think has a very interesting perspective on this, his model of the century is that the cost of energy and the cost of intelligence will trend almost to zero. And I think that's a really interesting thought experiment to think about what it might mean for our businesses. I don't think it's obvious. So with regard to the future, I think we don't know, but my view is it will certainly be profound.
Well, that is just a powerful thought, to imagine a world in which the cost of energy and the cost of intelligence had gone to zero. Just think about what that means for business, for society, for the way we organize ourselves and the way that is going to change. If we just think about some of the shifts that are happening in the just energy transition, and again, how some are pushing back, and to your point about trust, people are really going to be at the center of how quickly this transformation happens. Well, there you have it, folks, a riveting discussion on some of those challenges, some of the risks, some of the regulatory questions, some of the ethical questions, and equally the opportunity set in this very revolutionary time we're living in with generative AI. Kavi Pather, EY Africa AI and Advanced Analytics Leader, thank you as always. You're someone who really gets me to think very deeply and differently about a very interesting field. So thanks for your input.
Thanks, Michael. Great to talk to you today.